Hi, I'm Rodney Johnson, co-editor of Boom and Bust and Survive and Profit. The average American is not very good with numbers, and particularly statistics. A recent report on treatment shows that potential patients will agree to a procedure more often if it's described as being 70% successful versus failing 30% of the time, even though the two are the same. Such reports kind of make you shake your head. That kind of thing is not limited to just everyday people. I was recently surprised to find the same story in the Wall Street Journal. The statistics described in the article floated right by at first because they're quoted all the time. But if anyone had just taken a minute, 30 seconds to think about it, it would have been clear that the typical conclusion makes no sense. And yet, here was the most respected business paper in the U.S. putting it front and center, which is what annoyed me so much. To make it worse, the same issue of the paper had a different story that said the exact opposite. On February 13th, the Wall Street Journal reported Americans are living longer, and therefore we have more chances to get married, meaning we marry several times. While Americans are divorcing, the rate of remarriage is quite high. Because we're living longer than previous generations, the story went, we have more opportunities to try marriage again and again and again. Then it got interesting. The story pointed out that people are marrying later in life for the first time. However, this trend masked the fact that our lifespan's increased, which actually means we're marrying early in our lifespan. Not exactly. The author pointed out that today the typical man marries around 29, well above the low average age of marriage of 23 recorded in the 50s, but only 3 years more than the average age of marriage in 1890. Since the average lifespan in 1890 was only 43 years, men were marrying halfway through their lives. But now that the average age of death is in the upper 70s, men are marrying in the first third of their lives. Every time I hear that sort of thinking, I just want to smack somebody. There's no question that the average age of death in the 1890s was 43. Okay, and that the average age of death now is in the upper 70s. But it doesn't mean people experience the averages. It just doesn't work that way. Before the 1920s, infant mortality was very high because of disease and the lack of medicine. If the deaths before the age of 5 are taken out of the numbers, then life expectancy in the 1800s shoots up to the 60s, which makes a lot more sense. If people were dying at 43 before the 1920s, there'd be no stories before the 20th century about old people. On the face of it, that's just ridiculous. In the same edition of the Wall Street Journal, there was a story on the presidential Bible class, recounting how different presidents read and referred to the Bible. Among them was Lincoln, who began the Gettysburg Address with 7 years ago. As the author points out, young people might find the language kind of stilted, but those familiar with the good book will recognize the words from Psalm 90:10. It described the stretch of a man's lifetime as 70, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years. Keep in mind a score is 20 years. So in biblical times, thousands of years ago, a man lived to be 70, or if he was strong, 80. And yet here we are acting as if people expired at 43 years old in the late 1800s just because the average told us so. Sometimes you'll find that a widely reported number, one that people rely on for all sorts of estimates and calculations, bears no resemblance to reality, even if it's technically correct. Given that we all rely on statistics and the conclusions we draw from them in our daily lives, it's best to view all of them very carefully, even when they come from a reputable source. Thank you.